song as we think about how to love people that you disagree with this morning. If you'll open to Luke chapter 6, that's where we will begin. So grateful to be here worshiping God. So glad for all of our visitors this morning. Grateful that you have come to worship God with us, to study His Word with us, to love one another, and to reach out to those who are lost and don't know the Lord and give them the hope that they too can find Christ. That's what we're all about here at the Palm Springs Drive Church of Christ. And in Luke chapter 6, we begin with a very, very challenging passage where Jesus says in Luke 6, verses 31 to 36, "Treat others the same way you want them to treat you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for He Himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." The following are actual statements made by people who cut off communication with friends and family members over political disagreements. One woman told a friend of 25 years, "Dude, I'm done. Lose my number." One man cut off contact with his cousins and said, "I hate to say it because family is everything, but I disowned them. In my mind, they're not family anymore." Another who disagreed with a friend about police brutality said, "I told him, if this is your attitude, we can't be cool anymore. I don't respect you now. I don't, because people are really dying." One woman who disagreed with a friend about the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and Kavanaugh's guilt, she said, "It made me sick. If this is his core ethics, I don't want that kind of person in my life." People are so divided today, in large part because we have forgotten how to have civil disagreements, but also because people don't know how to keep relationships intact with those with whom they disagree. And people usually take one of two wrong approaches. Number one, I can only love you if you change your views. If you can just see things my way and come over to my side, well, then we can be friends. Then I can respect you and treat you with kindness. But when the other person doesn't change their views, well, then it's, hey, we're done. Now, the second approach is, I can only love you if I change my views. In other words, I need to try to see things your way, and if I can come over to your side, well, then we can be friends, and I can respect you and treat you with kindness. And so this person maybe genuinely tries to see things from the other side, but maybe the more they research it, the more they realize, actually, I believe my side even stronger now, and so again, it leads to the same result. We're done. Jesus gives us a third option. And Christianity revolutionizes the way that we deal with disagreements, whether political, religious, or any other kind. Because Jesus says the third approach is, I can love you, I can be friends with you, I can respect you and treat you with kindness, even if we never see eye to eye on a particular issue. And notice, loving those we disagree with isn't an option. It's a command. Because look at the way, Jesus says, look at the way our Heavenly Father loves us, even people who disagree with Him. God is kind. And think about the way God treats people. God is kind. He gives rain and food and clothing and family and careers and oxygen and even His own Son on the cross for people who don't even agree He exists. Jesus says we must love those we disagree with, yes, even when the disagreement makes it seem like they are my enemy. And the good news is, He gives us the tools to do that in His Word. In many different places in His Word, but this morning, let's look at Ephesians 4. This will sort of be our foundational text in Ephesians 4. In our daily Bible reading, we just finished Ephesians, and this book is exactly what our divided nation needs right now, because it is the antidote to tribalism. When left on our own, apart from God, humans always divide into tribes. And my tribe thinks that that tribe is inferior. My tribe is better than that tribe. I'm smarter, I'm morally superior, and not only that, that tribe is a threat to my existence. And what does that do? That creates hostility, division, and tension. Yet the beauty of the gospel is that the cross of Christ destroys all of our man-made barriers between us. And He unites us all into one new humanity, a multi-ethnic family, a new temple of God out of which His glory and blessings fill the earth. And our calling in Ephesians is to be this new united humanity bound together in love. And in Ephesians 4, Paul shows us exactly how to live in a manner worthy of that grand calling. And he says in verses 1 through 3, "Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord," by the way, Paul is in prison while he writes this, "I implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." These 5 attitudes are the key to unity, to healing ruptured relationships, and to loving people that we disagree with. Not just within the church, but with people outside the church as well. And perhaps it's providential that we just finished Ephesians at a time like this in our nation, when we just had an election and when we're about to meet with our families for the holidays, with whom we may have disagreements. Now, let me make 2 disclaimers, though, at the start of this lesson. First of all, I am not encouraging us to go out and talk to people about politics. As Christians, the focus should be the gospel. Okay, I preached about that, a month ago. It may be best to avoid politics if it's causing needless tension in our relationships. That's okay. You can make that decision for yourself. But I will also say there may be some cases with some people who are particularly passionate about that subject where maybe not sharing your political views can keep them at more of an arm's length. Because think about this, anytime you hide something about yourself, it can be a barrier to connection. I understand you may decide, I need to hide this because I get attacked if I don't. I get that, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, but my point in this sermon is not to talk about political disagreements, but disagreements of any kind. Whether political, whether religious, or even minor day-to-day disagreements with your spouse or your siblings. Now, the second disclaimer is that this sermon is not really about persuasion techniques. It is not about how to convince somebody to agree with me. And I have to say that right up front because you might be waiting. Okay, where's the part where Brian tells me how to change somebody? Okay, that's not the point. I have preached sermons on that. I'll preach more on that in the future. Okay, and I'll even mention some techniques, yes, in passing this morning. But this sermon is much more about the attitudes that we bring to our disagreements. And the truth is, if we don't get these attitudes right, the techniques won't matter. And if we do get these attitudes right, we won't need perfect technique because we will be creating room for grace within that relationship when the words maybe don't come out as well as we would have hoped. And I'll just say there's just no other religion, no other system of thought in the world that compares to the way Christianity equips us to love those with whom we disagree. Here in Ephesians 4, we see 5 attitudes that we need in order to do that. The first is humility. Matches up well with what Dwayne talked to us about this morning in the Lord's Supper. Tribalism and hostility over disagreements stems from self-righteousness. One side thinks they're morally superior to the other. They have morally superior beliefs, they have morally superior attitudes, and they have superior minds. But the other side, well, they're just evil and they're wrong and they're too dumb to see it. But the cross of Christ, and I'm going to make this point for all 5 of these points. I'm going to show why Christianity is so unique in preparing us to have these disagreements. The cross shows us actually we're all evil. And all of us were wrong about Jesus and too dumb to see it. And that means we're all on equal footing. Okay, now that doesn't mean that your ideas or beliefs might not actually be superior to someone else's ideas or beliefs. This isn't just a pluralism, everybody's equally right and valid. No, that's not the point here. But it does mean we're not any more deserving of heaven for holding those beliefs. We're not a superior human being who can look down our noses at others because we're correct on an issue. And here's what humility looks like. Number 1, assume good motives. If we are arrogant, we will think, I have good reasons for my beliefs, but others believe what they do because they're selfish and they want to destroy our country and they don't care about God at all. We see this in the media on both sides, where both accuse the other political side. They assign the absolute most sinister motives to everything that the other person says or does on the other side of the political aisle. And it happens between religious groups too. And it can even happen in minor day-to-day disagreements in our household. And I appreciated Tim leading that song about love one another because it comes from 1 Corinthians 13. And I'll be using this a lot too because it's Paul's just brilliant unpacking and description of what love is. It's 16, actually, different features of love. One compared it to a diamond, and he's comparing the 16 facets of this beautiful diamond of love. And he says in 1 Corinthians 13:7, love bears all things, believes all things. Now, that is not about gullibility. He's not talking about naively just believing whatever it is that you hear. It's about believing the best about people. So love looks at someone we disagree with and says, you know what? They want society to flourish like I do. Now, they may disagree with me, and I may disagree with them completely about the best way to go about it. But at their core, they want the same thing that I do. They want society to flourish. Or with our denominational friends, we might say, look, there's some big religious disagreements, and we should have conversations about that, but we're all trying our best to honor Jesus with our current knowledge and level of understanding. With our spouses, you might say, my husband or wife, they may have gone about this in the totally wrong way, but they were just trying to help. Assume good motives. Secondly, admit when you were wrong. If we're arrogant, our goal in disagreements is to win at all costs, which means we can't concede any ground or give the impression that they are right about any part of the disagreement. But if that's us, we are what the Bible calls a fool. And Proverbs 23:9 says, do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. If we're an arrogant fool, even if someone makes a great point to us, we won't admit it. Because we might be admitting that we could be losing here. And so we find ourselves arguing against things that are actually correct and just blatantly correct, which makes us look worse, and it makes us look totally unloving to the person because we're showing utter disrespect even for true things that they are saying. If, on the other hand, we're humble and we're willing to listen, we can actually acknowledge when someone makes a really great subpoint in the discussion, or when someone is right about the whole point, about the whole thing. Back to 1 Corinthians 13, verse 7, love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Love is thrilled to find out the truth, even when it contradicts what I believe. Love is not out to win an argument. That is not the goal of love. The goal is to cross a bridge and build a relationship, which means we can actually compliment them in a disagreement. We can say, wow, that's a great point. I had never thought about that before. It doesn't mean that they've changed our mind now about the whole issue, but we're admitting there is legitimacy to their point of view, and we're not treating them like a total buffoon who's just totally wrong about everything. If they're presenting a lot of good information, we can say, wow, I'm really impressed with your knowledge on this subject. I mean, most people, they don't even know why they believe what they believe, but I can tell you've done your research. That's a humble thing to say. And when you're humble, you can even admit when you're outmatched. And you can tell this person, wow, I got to admit, it sounds like you know a lot more about this subject than I do. Can you share more with me about this? And yes, you may even come to a point where you admit, I've been wrong about this. Thirdly, treat it as a learning experience. Many times we avoid disagreements like the plague because it feels so threatening, and our fight or flight response is going off. But that threatened feeling comes because we're viewing it as a fight with winners and losers. Instead, why not view it as a chance to learn more about a subject on a deeper level? And more importantly, to learn more about that person on a deeper level. Proverbs 10, verse 23, says, doing wickedness is like sport to a fool, but so is wisdom to a man of understanding. For humble and wise people, gaining wisdom is fun. It's like a sport that you enjoy. So when we disagree with people, instead of making winning the goal, make learning the goal. And there is always more to learn. Not just about subjects, right, but about the people that we're talking to. And so you could say to someone with a different political or religious belief, tell me more about your perspective because I really want to understand the other side. You can ask, do you have any good articles or books or videos or podcasts to recommend where I can go and learn more about this? When you have this attitude, okay, this conversation already has become less threatening, both for you and the person that you're talking to. And beyond learning more about the subject, we can learn more about the person. And maybe ask things like, I can tell you're really passionate about this. Can you help me understand why this subject means so much to you? Or was there some major moment or event in your life that influenced you to see the issue this way? This helps foster empathy and connection with this person. So now I'm seeing, they don't just oppose deportation because, they just read some left-wing article and they hate our country. But because their parents are illegal immigrants and they're scared and they're sad about leaving. Now this is a person that I'm talking to with real struggles. Another example, this is a real one. I know someone in this situation. But now I'm seeing, hey, they don't just oppose a cappella singing in the church because they want a rock band, and they just want to be entertained. They don't want to worship God. They're there for their own carnal desires. No, it's because their mom told them at an early age they had a terrible voice and should not be singing in church. Now I'm seeing my kid isn't misbehaving because he's a menace, but because he's being bullied in school and feels all alone and doesn't know what to do with his anger. Right? All these scenarios. It doesn't mean that we're going to change our minds about our policies or about musical instruments and worship. It doesn't mean we're going to change and say, oh yeah, your behavior, son, is fine. You can continue misbehaving. It doesn't mean that we're agreeing with those things, but it does mean we've just learned something that can help us love this person on a much deeper level and appreciate where they're coming from. When we treat disagreements as chances to learn about our neighbor, it humanizes our neighbor. Instead of reducing them to a slogan or to a talking point or assigning evil motives, we're actually honoring their unique personhood and life circumstances, and it makes it easier to love our neighbor as ourselves. Secondly, gentleness. Gentleness is the restraint of our power to hurt each other. We have tremendous power to tear people down with our words, to yell and shout, to be blunt and abrasive and sarcastic and condescending, and yes, even to get physically violent. But the cross teaches us to restrain that power the way Jesus did for us. Our disagreement with Jesus was so strong, we put him on a cross. Yet instead of using his power to snap his fingers and destroy us in the moment, or to yell and scream in our faces, he restrained his power and was gentle as a lamb. So this looks like a couple things. One, use a calm tone. Proverbs 15, verse 1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Many people get their sense of self-worth and security and identity in being right. which means they can't afford to be wrong. And if someone challenges them with something they can't answer, well, now their identity and their self-worth is at stake. And so they'll put the gloves on and they will fight for their lives. But as Christians, our self-worth and security and identity are not found in being right in a disagreement, but being right with Christ. So we don't have to fight, and we don't have to shout, and we don't have to view disagreements as a threat. 1 Corinthians 13:5, love does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. Love is not provoked. Love is not provoked, which means we don't have to be sensitive, touchy people that everyone has to walk on eggshells around for fear of offending us because we're just going to blow up on them. Instead, if we feel our heart rates rising, the temptation to start raising the voice and the tone, well, now we pray to God. Help us to be calm in this moment. We take some deep breaths. Maybe we tell the person, hey, let me take a break here. Let's come back to this. Let me collect myself. You know, sometimes we lose our calm, and I'm very guilty of this. I really have to watch myself in conversations. We lose our calm tone, not because we're angry or defensive, but because we're so passionate about the subject. It just means so much to us. But you have to understand, passion is no excuse for raising our voice. It's just not, because the person that you're talking to, they're going to interpret that as anger and hostility. They're not going to interpret it as they're not going to say, wow, you're just so passionate and I admire your heart. No, they're going to feel attacked, like it's not safe for me anymore. And either they'll shut down and just decide I'm not talking to you anymore, or they'll put the gloves on and they'll start fighting right back. And now they're fighting your passion with actual anger and defensiveness, which is not going to go well. Hey, be polite and respectful. 1 Corinthians 13:5 again, love does not act unbecomingly. Another way to translate it is love does not act rudely. We talked about this in our sermon on 4D kids, but it applies to adults too. Okay, it's rude. It is not gentle to tell someone, you're wrong, period. It's rude to say, how could anyone believe something so ridiculous? It's rude to cut people off while they're talking and explaining their perspective. It's rude to talk over people and say, well, I'll just use more volume and that way I can't even hear you anymore. That's an abuse of our power. We're using our power to oppress people instead of laying aside our power in love like Jesus did. A much more polite and respectful way to disagree is to say, look, I hear you and I think that's a fair point. I think you've made some good points, but I'm curious, what do you think about this? Or thank you so much for sharing that with me. I didn't know that about you. Do you mind if I share my perspective on this? See, gentleness turns it into a back and forth dialogue, and it disarms people from feeling like it's a debate with winners and losers. One writer said, we want our disagreements to feel like we're sitting on the same side of the table, working together to understand each other and collaborate on an issue, rather than sitting across from the table as adversaries. This is exactly what Jesus did for us. He didn't come to sit across from us as our adversary, but sit with us as our friend, even when we didn't see eye to eye. I mean, Jesus disagreed politically and religiously with every person on the planet. Jesus disagreed politically and religiously with Judas and with the Samaritan woman at the well, and with Simon the Zealot, who was a terrorist against the Romans. He disagreed with all of his disciples. All of his disciples had a totally wrong view about what it meant that he was the Messiah. They thought he was going to go and conquer the Romans. They thought he was going to be like a super zealot, like Simon, a super terrorist, and totally destroy the Romans. They were wrong about that. Okay, he disagreed with Nicodemus, the Pharisee, on a lot of issues. He disagreed with the Roman centurions. And again, honestly, he disagreed with the whole world. And yet he loved the whole world and gave his life for every person on the planet. He treated them with gentleness and respect and even died for them on a cross. Thirdly, patience. Patience means bearing with someone as they grow. And it may mean putting up with insults and mischaracterizations. But because instead of taking it personally, you're giving them time to work these things out and to eventually come around. And think of how patient Jesus is with us as we grow in our spiritual understanding. Think of how many times we sin against Jesus along the way as we're growing in our knowledge, in our understanding. Yet Jesus gives us time, He gives us grace, He gives us forgiveness while He shapes us with the truth over time. So that means, number one, don't rush agreement. A lot of times, disagreements get so intense because we're pressuring the person to change their view immediately. We don't just want them to see things our way. We want them to see things our way right now. And if it's taking longer than we expected, well, now we're getting frustrated, and now that frustration is coming out in our tone and making things worse. Paul says this, 1 Corinthians 3, 5 through 7. What then is Apollos? What is Paul? We're just servants through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God causes the growth. Sometimes we get impatient over religious disagreements, especially because we think that we're a failure if we didn't convince the person right then and there. But when it comes to matters of truth, whether it's religious truth or maybe political issues or even in the day-to-day affairs of life, God isn't pressuring us to make sure people change their views. God is asking us to plant the seeds of truth in love and to leave the changing to Him. Think about your own life. If you have ever changed your mind on any issue at all, even if it's about a belief or maybe it's about a behavior that you've been engaged in, if you've ever changed your mind, most of the time it's not instantaneous. Okay, most of it's not Paul's experience on the road to Damascus, right, where Jesus parts heaven and He just speaks to you and says, "Why are you being dumb?" Right? Stop kicking against the goads, like He said to Saul. Okay, that was pretty instantaneous. And Saul was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm totally wrong. My whole life has just been a lie." Okay, but for most of us, that takes a long time to sort of change and break free from that. And you know what? God and hopefully the people around you were patient with you while you worked that out. And we are called to extend the same patience to others. It also means be willing to suffer as they grow. Earlier, 1 Corinthians 13, 4 and 5, love is patient. There's our patience again. Love is kind, is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. We talked about that. Does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Does not take into account a wrong suffered. Man, this sermon is getting hard. This is a hard passage. Okay. If someone is convinced, for instance, that all political conservatives are racists, and everyone in churches of Christ, they're all legalists, that's where they are right now. And if you have discussions with them about it, they may say some things that are really insulting to you. And I guess you could take the approach of, insulting them right back and confronting them, and don't you dare say that about me. That's not going to make any matters better. It's just going to make things worse. Instead, why not be patient and hopeful that this mistreatment of you is only temporary while you walk with them through their misunderstanding and you try to change their mind. This is what Jesus did. Okay, He put up with people's insults, like His brothers making fun of Him, and the disciples abandoning Him, and the Jewish religious leaders putting Him on the cross, and the crowds hurling insults at Him while He was up on the cross. Why did He do that? Because He knew they didn't understand, and they needed time to grow. It's why He prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus knew the time was coming when they would see the truth finally, and they would realize that they're wrong. And instead of hating Him, many of them, including His brothers, would be worshiping Him and giving their lives in service to Him. Fourthly, tolerance. And this gets more difficult. This is even more difficult than patience. Okay, because tolerance is similar to patience, but it's much harder because it's without the expectation of growth. With patience, I'm expecting that they'll change and they'll grow over time, but tolerance is about loving people and bearing with them, even suffering at their hands, even when they don't change, or even when you know they won't change. And this brings us back to God in Luke 6. who tolerates people who totally blaspheme him, who don't even think he exists, and will never change. Yet he continues, God does, to shower them with blessings from above because he loves them. And this means a couple things. Number one, not everyone's views need to change. This is part of tolerance. It's just realizing not everyone needs to change their views. This was a big issue in the first century world where the Jews, they brought a lot of their baggage, their Jewish culture, over into the church with them. And they thought, well, now that I'm a Christian, I still have to do all the Jewish stuff. I still got to eat the clean and unclean foods. I have to avoid the unclean foods, eat the clean foods. I have to keep all the holidays and all that. And then the Jews were saying, hey, the Gentiles aren't doing this. They need to change their view on this. The Gentiles need to start doing these Jewish things too. And Paul said, no, they do not. And he said, look, in Romans 14:4, who are you to judge the servant of another? To his own master he stands or falls, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. So this chapter is about matters of conscience. Because a lot of religious and political and even day-to-day issues are matters of personal conscience, things that God has not ruled on specifically in his word. Okay, there are some very clear truths in Scripture that God just lays out for us, exactly. But other matters, God leaves to individuals to work out in their own conscience. And we're called to show tolerance for people even when they disagree with us. And it's okay if they never agree with us about it. But it also means not everyone is willing to change. And we still tolerate those that are not. Jesus acknowledged there are some people whose hearts are so hard, they will refuse to change even after hearing the truth. Doesn't matter what you tell them. Some are so hardened, they're not even willing to have a conversation. And if you even try to bring up a disagreement, well, they're just going to jump all over you, and they're going to make you pay for that, and it's going to be impossible to get anywhere with them. Okay, Jesus put it like this. It's a little bit harsh, but it's true, right? There are people like this. Do not give what is holy to dogs. And do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet and then turn and tear you to pieces. If it is the case that someone has proven they have no more appreciation for truth than pigs do for pearls, and they're tearing us to pieces every time we're in a disagreement, what do? We show tolerance for them by realizing this is the person that they have chosen to be. And there's nothing I can do about it. Now, if this is a Christian with this attitude, this is sinful. This can't be tolerated. The church needs to deal with that, and there's other passages about church discipline and all that. Okay, but if it's a non-Christian, and it's a family member, or if it's a friend, okay, showing tolerance means we don't have to cut them off completely. We just need to set healthy boundaries with them and realize certain subjects are just going to be off limits with them. They're just incapable of having civil disagreements about religion or politics or whatever other subject. So we tolerate their intolerance and we try to have the best relationship we can with them under the circumstances. I mean, let's just be realistic. God does not expect that we will be best friends with people like this. Just like people who reject Him and never change, they're not going to be with Him in heaven. But God does expect that we show tolerance and we continue to love them even when they won't change. And that leads to the final point, love. And this is really, it's a fifth point, but it's also a foundation for the whole lesson. Because Paul says you show them tolerance in love, right? Everything we're doing is because of love. And I started in Luke 6 because it helps us understand what love really means. Jesus said in Luke 6 essentially that love is about seeking the well-being of others regardless of how they respond. 1 Corinthians 13, Paul makes a pretty startling statement. He says, if I have the gift of prophecy and I know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. A more modern version might read, if I'm right about every political position, and I'm right about all of my religious doctrines, and I win every argument with stunning rhetorical technique, but don't have love, I am nothing. Back in 2020, there was a controversial series of drawings of Jesus that I think perfectly captures the message I'm trying to portray and that God's Word is trying to portray to us this morning. Here's the pictures. There was an update in 2024 to add Kamala. But you know, the reason these drawings were so controversial is because people assumed it meant Jesus is showing his agreement with people like Kamala and Trump, or he's showing his support for the LGBTQ lifestyle, or for criminals, or the other reason it was controversial is because people thought, well, they're just saying Jesus is a universalist, meaning everybody's going to heaven, doesn't matter how you live or what you believe or what your positions are, everybody's coming to heaven. But that completely misses the point of these pictures. These pictures are not about Christ agreeing with their positions or their beliefs or their lifestyle. And he's not saying everyone is just all right with God. It's about Christ loving people despite their disagreements and using love to try to change people's hearts and beliefs and lifestyles. And of course, these pictures are rooted in John 13 and verse 5. It says, Jesus poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. This is the night before his death, and one of the disciples whose feet Jesus is washing is Judas, the one who within just a few hours is going to betray him and turn him over to the authorities. When Jesus washed Judas's feet, he was not endorsing Judas's betrayal. In fact, Jesus knew Judas's heart was so hard that there was nothing Jesus could do to change him. He knew not even bending down and washing his feet would change his mind, and yet he still did it anyway. He could have said, you know what? We're done, Judas. Lose my number. But instead, he picked up a bowl and a towel, and he served him in love anyway. And now he's calling on us to do the same. You know, if we only love those who agree with us and get along with us on every issue and there's no conflict, how are we any different from those out in the world? Anybody can do that. Where we will really stand out and where we will really make a huge difference in our world and in our communities and in our one-on-one relationships with those around us is when we can disagree in a calm, civil, Christ-like way, and we can keep that relationship intact. As much as depends on us, right? The other person might say, I don't want a relationship with you. Okay, but as much as depends on us, we continue to keep that relationship intact and we continue to show love and sacrifice and seeking out the well-being of the ones we disagree with. And you know what? That is what our world needs now more than ever. If you're here this morning and you've got a disagreement with God, that's a serious thing. If you're not right with the Lord, it's going to catch up to you. Could be later today. Could be tomorrow. None of us know how much time we have left. None of us know when Jesus is coming back. If you've got a disagreement and a problem with God, you got to fix that today. And the only way to do that is allow Jesus to fix that through the blood of the cross. But I want you to just think, despite your disagreement with God, think about all the amazing blessings in your life, all the things that God has been doing for you that you have been taking for granted all this time. And God wants you to look at that and say, look at the way that I've been kind to you. Even though you've hated me and been disobeying me and not following me, look at all these amazing things I've been showing you in love. And let that spur you on to say, yes, this is the God that I want to serve. That's what changes people's minds. Not that God used these perfect argument techniques, but He sent His Son to die for those He disagreed with. Nothing like it. No other religion, no other system of thought provides that kind of foundation for love. And if you've already become a Christian and you've walked away, you can make things right this morning by coming back to God. We're here to help you in whatever way to make Jesus your one true love again this morning. Come to Him. Let us know how we can help you. Always stand and sing.